Okay, we talked about management of Canada thistle and that, and quite often we can be our own worst enemies as organic farmers. We sometimes are busy, we don't get around to mowing our thistles or tilling them when we should. And so it's gotten to be a real big problem. Also, we've noticed that, as organic farmers, we're told that, you guys are doing too much tillage. You need to cut back on tillage, that's what we hear, and of course we know that's not all wrong or all bad. But also it does, add an expense to it, and so we try to cut back on tillage. And of course the rain issue, we know what that's like. The last 2 years, we've all in the Midwest have experienced much rain. I know in my area it was the third wettest on record and the cloudiest, which I think is huge as well too, not just the rain but the clouds, and that's of course with crop development, that's another topic, but it is a real issue, all the rain and that, and so thistles, they're down low, it's wet down there, and they really thrive when we get a lot of rain. Okay, this was actually a SARA-funded project. I call it a smother and starve approach because you're kind of hitting the thistles in two different ways. Sorghum Sudan grass, with the research that we did, was actually the most effective in controlling Canada thistle. Now maybe there's some other techniques or other crops ecologically that you've used that have done really well. I hear a lot of stories about farmers with raising hay on that. My dad had an organic dairy farm back in the 70s and the 80s, and we farmed organically as well too on the dairy, and we did not have quite the thistle problem. We had a lot of hay. But they were there. And so, if they're there, you never know when they can be a problem, especially with these wet years. Okay, we have what we call a smother effect. As you know, sorghum Sudan grass grows really fast, grows really tall. It outcompetes the Canada thistle for daylight. When you have that, it's so massive and there just isn't much light there, then it really keeps the thistles from getting the sunlight and get the photosynthesis that is not happening in the Canada thistle. And that's the whole thing, is that if it's not going to get sunlight, it's not going to grow very well. And I have a picture here of Sudan grass on my farm. There is one little Jimson weed down there in the bottom left, so we do have a few Jimson weeds, but since we aren't talking about Jimsons, talking about Sudan grass, we'll talk about Sudan grass. But you can see, though, the point is that you just see how thick that is. And I'll go into a little more later as to my sowing rates on the sorghum Sudan grass. But the whole idea is don't skimp on seed. You want to plant it thick because the whole objective is to get those thistles. Also, we have what I call a starvation effect to it. You look at, the next slide is going to be some pictures of some Sudan grass roots. They are not as massive as corn, but there's just a lot of plants out there. And so when you've got those roots, especially, we always seem like we get, even though in a wet year, we'll get that midsummer to late summer, early fall period of time where we tend to get a little dry. And so therefore, you've got these Sudan grass roots are going to suck up that moisture, and that leaves less moisture for the thistle, and that's what we want. So we want the Sudan grass roots to take up that moisture to compete well against the thistle. Okay. Okay. Next picture here. This is one of my fields. My fields average in size about 20 acres, and that's just the way it works on my farm with my grain bin storage and size of my bins and so forth. And so this field was a little less, it's 13 acres. This is back a couple of years ago, and you see a thistle patch there. And you notice with thistles, it's a patch distribution. You start out with a seed blowing in, and it only takes one, and the next thing you know, maybe next year you've got some about the size of your table. 2 years later, it's a little bigger, and it just grows because of the roots, especially the lateral roots. And so here, if you've got something like this, you may want to just take that part of the field out of production, maybe go another 20, 30 feet beyond where you see the thistles, because the roots are probably beyond that, and set that aside for this sorghum Sudan grass. In this case here, I had more than a spot. I had probably 5 or 6 spots like that, plus a few little patches here and there. And so in my opinion, it was just time to take out the whole field. Yes, I know it is a major detriment to take a field out of production. There's no income that year, plus a few expenses. But in the whole scheme of things, if you don't control your thistles, each year you're going to suffer a little loss. You've seen pictures and situations, you yourselves may be out there mowing patches with your mower or clipping them. So you start multiplying that out, even in crops like corn and soybeans, where it doesn't look like you've got many, but the cultivator is not going to get out those thistles in the row. And we know how they can stun out the crops. And so you start adding that up year after year, all of a sudden you're going to be looking at some, over 15, 20 years, some major losses. This picture here I actually pulled out of internet here a couple nights ago as I was putting this together. That field there is, as you can see, there's probably a few more patches, but a very, very small patch. And in a case like that, not going to take that out of production, probably not even going to go in there with a tractor or mower, just going to hand clip it. As far as clipping goes, for a number of years we used to use a hoe. Works pretty good, especially if the ground is nice and dry and hard. Sometimes we use a scythe, and that works okay too, but over time you get a little tired because there's a lot of that plant material with the wheat or oats, whatever you've got, to pull that hoe or knife through. And so what I did one day is I went to town, I tried some different types of clippers. I thought, let's try this. I bought maybe 5 or 6 different types. Some of those were kind of cheapies, maybe $10, $12, $15. This one costs about $25. It's Corona is the name of it. And, I only have about 50 acres of small grains each year, and I've got 6 of these and usually have 2 or 3, maybe 4 people out there. We go through twice. Second time is pretty quick, but the first time we can spend some time in those bad patches, and they just work great. I clip about a foot below the bottom rosette or bud. That way, late June, you're going to get some more growth, but they aren't going to grow much more than that. So that seems to work real well for me. By clipping them with this, they're going to be up near the top of the surface. They're going to dry out really quick and well. And so that's just what I have found. Those cheapy sort of clippers and that are, using for 2 minutes and you're about ready to throw them out. But one like this is really heavy duty and it just works really well. Okay, so we were talking about Canada thistle in our crops and that, but what about those areas where we do not till? Like waterways, fence lines. The whole thing, the key to it is, and I'll admit myself, a lot of times I get to that job maybe just once, at least in the early to midsummer, because there's a lot of work to do. And so we want to mow it with like a woods mower or some kind of a mower to keep those thistles down, especially before they start to blow in the wind. If you can mow, like I said, more than once, it works better because you're going to weaken those reserves even more. The research says 7 to 10 leaf stage. I don't think we're going to actually go out and count them, but that's what the research says. So that tells you something, that's the best time to get them. We want to, of course, mow them over and over again. You're going to starve the carbohydrates in the reserves themselves to the roots. And then by doing this, you're going to force the roots to penetrate deeper. And we want to get as much competition as we can with the sorghum Sudan grass plant. Okay, this is a picture of my farm, conventional off to the left, and as you can see, the no spray sign there. We all need to use those. But you'll notice on the right there is my corn, and there's a lane next to the corn, and then there's a fence line. And so these are areas where I would mow with my woods mower. We also walk the fence lines with a clipper and try to get the thistles out. Again, we have a spot in the waterways. We obviously cannot till the waterways, and so those areas will need some attention as far as mowing. And the Sudan grass there, I typically clip it about just slightly before it starts to head out, but this is in the early heading stage. And it's a good time to clip it, or slightly before that. There again, my woods mower, a lot of larger farmers have bat wings. They work really well. His next picture here is actually, I think, Adam, some of this work was actually went into that book that you had at Michigan State there. This was conducted on our farm in 2007. Some of the work was all done in Illinois. It became eventually a SARA grant proposal. What we've got here, I actually had 4 different crops here. One was cowpeas, which you don't see in the picture. And you'll see buckwheat, which I've raised quite a bit of over the years. But this was for a different purpose. This was for Canada thistle control. The sorghum Sudan grass there in the back. And then you'll see in front there, that was just black fallow. And normally you wouldn't want to do that just because, especially the whole season, that was field cultivated, just because of the fact of soil degradation and erosion too. So, but this was done only a couple acres of plot for the comparing how it did against the other crops. And then what happened then was towards the end of the fall, then we went out there and actually counted all the thistle plants. As I mentioned before, this was submitted in 2017. I was actually on the SARA Council at the time. I couldn't vote on it, but it did get accepted. It did get funded. And it's really been a really good project as far as the effectiveness of control there. And of course, the research bears it out. The work was done 2008, 2009. I had a chance to go out with 2 other farmers from Illinois to just make sure the people that that got the funding, there was like maybe $250 and then maybe another $250 at the end of the project. They got some mini grants to conduct the work. You'll notice 90% control in Iowa, Missouri, and Wisconsin. Illinois, a little better, but basically about the same. I think the reason why we were a little higher is that there was probably worse thistle patches in my area. And so a little more motivation maybe to follow the protocol and to get those thistles controlled. Now, of course, this may or may not be a negative, but we don't really know about the long-term impact. I did a field, it was actually part of a Moses field day back in 2010, small field. Haven't really had a problem except on the edges of the field where we had some thistles in the fence row on the west side and a little bit on the south side where you get more sunlight. But you go in about 20, 25 feet and there's no thistle there at all. The fields that I've done since then, I've done 4 other fields about 15, 20, 25 acres in size. But they've only been done in the last 3-4 years, but so far the only thing I've noticed is maybe a few next to a waterway, or if I've got a lot of clay knolls on my farm where the fertility isn't as good, and in those places a few try to come back, but they're pretty weak. Okay, really important here is the seeding date. Aim to seed that in mid-June, but I did seed some once July 4th, and that was fine just as well. Drilling rates 50 pounds an acre. I know that sounds kind of heavy, but again, this is a different purpose. If you look at your seed catalogs, you're typically going to see Sudan grass plant 25 to 30 pounds an acre or thereabouts. And that's fine for what you want to do for forage for ruminants. But in this case here, what we're doing is we just want to get as much on there as we can. I typically plant 45 to 50 pounds and just fine. If you plant 55, that's fine too. But anyway, the point here is just don't skimp on the seed. Sowing depth, inch and a half. There again, depends upon how much moisture you've got. Okay, the research, they did suggest a sterile variety. I tried, non-sterile because it's extra money, and it's been just fine. I have noticed maybe a dozen or 2 plants might volunteer the next year, but in a 20-acre field, I can live with something like that. So it's not been a problem after that. Okay, as far as the protocol I would use is, and Adam had mentioned this, ideally you really don't want to till any more than you have to because you're going to be chopping up those roots and you're going to be spreading them around your field. And from what I was told once, that in the fall is worse because of the root reserves. You're going to have a bigger issue if you do it in the fall, till in the fall versus in the springtime. So I till in the springtime, I say every 2 to 3 weeks, weather permitting. It might be a month if it rains a lot. But typically I try to hit it about, let's say, 3 times before I would plant corn or soybeans. Again, with a field cultivator, it's nice if you can get it on a warm, sunny day, low humidity, breezy, late morning, early afternoon, if that's ideal, if you can do it then. Here again is my field cultivator. Nothing fancy here, but you notice I've got the quack points on there. It's set on 6-inch spacing. I've got the double points, so they're reversible, but I don't really get a whole lot of wear on that quack digger. And I've gotten to the point actually where I use this for most of my tillage except my last pass before I plant corn or beans, where I like to get a better coverage of my weeds. But this works really well for digging out those roots. Now also, I believe Tom, I think he's talking, Tom, you're talking about quackgrass, right? I think. Okay. Now this sorghum Sudan also works well on quack, but I have not had a problem except maybe 20, 25 years ago I had some and it went away. So, but it would work well for that too. Okay, another issue can be buying seed. Weed seed free only. I made a mistake once. Back in '92, I think it was, I planted some spelt. I got the seed from out of state. I needed it right away. I should have returned it. I did not. And so that field went out of production back a couple of years ago. And so I was basically seeding the thistles with the spelt seed. And neighbors, you know, I've got 9 neighbors that are close by to me. You know, quite a few actually, and you know, they don't really know too much about Canada thistle. The farmers do, and you know, they'll spray them, but you know, sometimes there's places where they just don't spray, and then you get the thistles blowing. Okay, the question is, how do these thistles show up on my farm? I could tell some of you are my age. Heard that before. Okay. They say you have to have an outlier. It's good to have one outlier slide in your presentation. So when I thought about it, I saw those thistles blowing in the air that one day. I thought, you know, I can't pass this up. So anyway, I did have a neighbor. He's moved a number of years ago, but he had told me he came out from the city. He says, well, he actually liked watching those thistles blowing in the wind, and he was right to the south of my farm. And so I did have a talk with him one day, and anyway. To cut the Sudan grass, I like Haybine. It's a 492. I like it because it does a nice, clean job of cutting, and I like to get it off the ground about 12 to 15 inches, so that what I can do then is I don't smother the crop that's there, and I can get good regrowth. And that's why I like that machine. Now, that said, if it gets too tall, mature on you, it'll lodge. And I did knock out a little piece of rubber in that roller, and so that can be a problem. If it gets to be too mature, you probably want to use a stalk chopper. Okay, and then also, too, the windrow gate on the Haybine, I'll set that all the way down so when the Sudan grass goes through, it's actually hitting that and going to deflect down, so I won't get full coverage, but I get about 75 to 80% coverage on my ground with the Sudan grass. Okay, just a standard stalk chopper. What I do then is I do this twice. This is done like I usually wait till November. You don't have to chop it. I usually do, but you don't have to. And then I'll go through with that. By then, it's only maybe 2 or 3 feet tall. It's been frosted a number of times. And I have used that before the first time through if the Sudan grass gets away on me. And I'd rather use this chopper than I would the Haybine. And this field here was chopped here back in November, early December, and that's what's right there. Usually what I would do is I chisel plow or have my neighbor come over. I don't have the horsepower, he's got a deep ripper, and he would rip that. But this year I decided because it was so wet, I'm just gonna leave it there, and then in the springtime, I'll get the moldboard plow out, which I suppose is a dirty word, but sometimes if you got a plow and you're organic, don't ever sell that thing because you never know when you might need it. And so I will get that plow out this spring and I'll turn it under. It's level, you know, it's no big issues with slopes or hills in that field. Another thing that I didn't really think too much about, we all know there's an allelopathic effect with certain crops and that, even oats and wheat. And I didn't think much about Sudan grass until I did notice here a couple of years ago that the field that had been in Sudan grass the year before, it was planted to corner beans. I get at least a 7-day window, maybe 10 days of emergence delay in broadleaf weeds. And I think the research, you know, bears that out that Adam and others have done, is that it doesn't sound like a lot, but believe me, 7 to 10 days advantage on the weeds and the broadleafs is huge. And there's a picture of some newly developed, probably a year or two old. You got your vertical roots, which we're not going to get all the way out. They're just going to break off, and your lateral roots down below, which are kind of deep. And I'm just about done here. A few more slides. Picture here of what the roots really look like when you take a slice of dirt and you can, you know, brush the dirt away and see what it looks like. Same picture, but without the dirt. And so what you don't see there, it can be a real issue. And again, the roots can extend out 15 feet or more. They can travel 6 to 15 feet deep or even more. And my point here is that even though you can't see what's going on there, it can be a real problem. And so that's why we need to get on it and do something. I just threw this in here at the end. I saw this in a publication, just a little something to help you out if you like to keep records, a little listing of your weeds, why they cause the problem, what's worked and what hasn't worked, and other observations. And just some insights here. I won't discuss it because of time here, but you can read that. I have not actually tried these things myself, but that's what some of our friends from Canada say works for them. I would warn about sweet clover. It can be a little tough on ruminants if they eat too much of it, and it can volunteer too. References, if you want any of that, you can see me on that one or talk to Harriet. Okay, thank you.